So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim,
atheist and agnostic as well as many times.
Put really simply, epistemology is how do we consider something a piece of knowledge, or how do we know if we're knowledgeable about something? The big question is, how do we justify knowledge and belief? So epistemology deals with memory, perception, reason, and testimony. And this is how we decide if something is valid. The two biggest ones I think religion leans on is testimony and perception.
Absolutely.
And this is going to be an unpopular opinion, I'm sure, but that's because you can warp perception.
You can. You absolutely can warp perception. So epistemology asks questions like, what is knowledge? And we looked at some categories on how we can kind of explain that. How is knowledge acquired is super tricky. And the ultimate question of epistemology is, can we have knowledge? Can you really know anything?
That really hurt my head.
There's loads of people that say, of course I can know things. I know the socks are red. I know this carpet is softer than concrete. But, I mean, ultimately that comes down to perception. And for the vast majority of philosophers, including you and me, perception is reality.
Yeah.
But what if it's not?
Then we're in the Matrix. I think we can know some things, but probably a lot less than we think we know.
It gets tricky. The real question for every little piece of knowledge that you think you have is, do I actually know this? And for an awful lot of people with religious experience, and I'm going to categorize this nice and broadly, every single person has the majority of the world population opposing the justification for their belief.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that everyone thinks they're right.
Absolutely. Like, you wouldn't hold on to a belief if you thought it was wrong.
But I think people forget that.
Yeah.
You know, everyone thinks they're right in whatever, as particularly in religious beliefs. I think there's other topics people are a little more, I'm willing to learn. But when it comes to religious beliefs and where we go when we die, everyone thinks they're right.
Though most are willing to admit ignorance to some degree. But they never say, I think my beliefs are wrong. Because then they cease to be your beliefs.
Right. So I just, if you meet someone who's different than you, just have that compassion for them, because
you can't hit somebody into believing what you believe.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work.
No.
People have tried. God, people have tried so much, but it doesn't work. In following that theme of what is knowledge, how is knowledge acquired, and can we actually really have knowledge, there's some interesting follow-up questions of what do people know? Like, you're going to run into people who are 100% convinced of things. They have strong convictions. And you have to wonder, what do they know? What evidence do they have? What experiences have they had that bring them to where they are? It's kind of fascinating. Mm-hmm. That's how I like to apply that question anyway. There's also the question, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge? That's a long, really wordy question, but it's, how can you say you know anything?
And I think that's different for everyone.
Absolutely.
It has to be. I mean, especially in the context of religion, and right, like in my world, I've seen no proof of God. But obviously, most of the world disagrees with me.
What makes justified beliefs justified? There is one reality that is 100% the reality, the real state of things. But there's no person on this planet that you're going to be able to convince that their perception of reality differs from your own. The familiar world is brought to appearance only by the grace of thinking. You and I, we perceive through a filter of thought. That we have to assume that everything that reacts to its environment is also doing the same thing to some degree or another. Obviously, you and I think a lot more about what's going on around us than butterflies do. People believe things because they perceive a reason to believe them. Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy